So, good morning, folks. Pat Downs here from the Institute of Management Consultants and Advisors. And we're delighted to welcome you all here this morning to what is been a very windy 24 hours. So it's been quite blustery. So it's nice to get a little bit of calm in the tranquil space of Zoom for a little while to have an interesting chat with our colleagues over the course of the next couple of minutes. So thank you for joining us. And just for advice, we are recording this and we will be disseminating the recording thereafter, and we'll share it with you. We'll send it out to the participants as well who registered. Some of you for various reasons mightn't be able to attend in person, but have registered, so we'll be sending it out to you. And so feel free to share that as well. We do allocate CPD on request for these things as you wish, so you can apply for that on demand. So it's quite exciting for us this morning. I was talking to Alan and Karen and Marrita earlier, and we are, I suppose, in an unusual space. We're coming out of, I suppose, a pandemic after the last 24 months. It's been extraordinary in terms of the leapfrog and technology, and in terms of work practices and so on. And people had to work virtually and remotely and in a hybrid fashion over the last period of time. So from that perspective, the paradigm has changed because we're coming out of COVID. And even though we thought that the light at the end of the tunnel was something a little bit different, we also have a Ukrainian conflict in Eastern Europe coming at us as well. So the world is still in quite a lot of turmoil. But nonetheless, we have the challenge of, I suppose, work practices that have evolved over the last 24 months. And I suppose really that's what we're going to have a chat about, and the opportunities and challenges and how people are addressing them. And, we're quite fortunate this morning. We've got some award winners with us here, and we're delighted that they're going to share their knowledge and insights. And to that end, just maybe to set the scene, if it was okay with you, we're going to send, or rather show you a little video that they've been kind enough to share with us. And through the wonders of Zoom and technology, we're now going to play the video. And if the magic sauce works, all things being equal, you should be able to watch it. So I'm just going to play that. And when we finish that, I'm going to hand over to our president, Marrita Kavanagh, who is hosting the Fireside Chat this morning. And Marrita will do a more in-depth, I suppose, introduction of our colleagues, Karen and Alan. And we're really looking forward to that. So it'll be about, give or take, 40 minutes. And we'll have a Q&A such as requested afterwards. And if you want to send in some questions after the event, please feel free to email us at admin@imca.ie, and we'll pass them on to Alan, Marrita and Karen, who have indicated that they'll be happy to kind of touch base and come back on any particular questions that you might wish to ask. So without further ado, I'm going to cross my fingers here now and press the big red button. And hopefully, all things being equal, this will work. So here we go, folks. So
I think it's allowed me to spend a lot more time with myself and my family, and also to focus on myself both professionally, personally as well. I recently completed a diploma through the King's Inn, so in advanced employment law, which was supported by the bank. So for me, it's been a massive, massive benefit.
It's actually shown me how great a company we are, because we genuinely care about our colleagues' well-being. We're prepared to try something different.
It gives a great work-life balance because you're a little bit more relaxed because you're breaking the week, you're just working 2 days.
You just have enough of being at home and you come back to work, you have enough of being at work and you go back home. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I like Mondays because I know everyone else is out of the house. It's my day.
I live in quite a small apartment and there's 3 of us in the apartment and everyone's at home all day. So I suppose one of the best things about the day desks is, there is kind of a sense of community there. If someone has an issue, everyone will help out and it kind of brings you together. So even though we're all from different teams on the day desks, you feel like the one team and we're all working together for the same purpose.
This will have a huge impact on my work-life balance. It's a statement, I suppose, from top down, that the employee experience is parallel to customer experience, and it shows that the company have a vested interest in their employees.
For everyone, there was big changes with COVID. So with working full-time from home, with the lack of family around, I did find it quite isolating. So I made the decision to move home, to be closer to family, and the added bonus then of actually being able to work in the Sligo branch, integrate with the team there, get to know them.
Day one nearly, they were asking, what did you want to do? What's going to work for you? what's going to work for your family. And this is helping our communities as well. For me, I get to drop my kids to school in the morning, get to collect them in the afternoon. I get to see things that I never would have seen before with my kids, my family.
So excellent. And thank you for sharing that, Karen. So I'm going to hand over to Marrita now, who's going to take the ship of state out and coast it from here. So thank you, Marrita.
Thanks, Pat. So good morning, everybody. Great to be here, and special welcome to my guests, Karen and Alan. So just the background here is I was invited by PTSB to come and work with them on their hybrid workplace return to the work program. So we set up a multidisciplined program team from IT, HR and facilities, and we are preparing the workplace and preparing colleagues for the return to work. It's a huge change. I think I suppose the big change came 2 years ago when the PTSB staff all started to work from home, and that was a huge shift from them. They had been predominantly office-based, working on PCs in the office in Stephen's Green, Cork, Blackrock. So IT had a huge effort to allow everybody to work from home. And now we have another huge effort to prepare the workplace and prepare them for coming back. And the message from the CEO, the senior management team is really clear that they want an excellent colleague experience. So it's a really great program to work on. There's a huge investment, and it's a great team working together. So Karen and Alan, I just ask you to introduce yourselves. Ladies first. Karen, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks a million. As everybody said, I'm Karen Hackett. I had a people experience here at Permanent TSB, and kind of had quite a varied career. I suppose I started off in retail banking. I moved into broader financial services and insurance with Irish Life and came back to Permanent TSB in 2013. I've worked right across, I suppose, the operation would have deep understanding of colleague experience, I suppose, from joining right through those moments that matter. And in the past 2 years, I've worked through the management, worked alongside Alan actually, and moved into ways of working, looking at new ways of working, and more recently into working with Marrita now on hybrid ways of working, new flexible workplace. So that's kind of me.
Thanks, Karen. And Alan?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm responsible for enterprise IT services within Permanent TSB. I've been with the organisation for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was about 15 years with AIB. I've been in technology delivery for all my life, or for all my working career anyway. It feels like all my life.
Well, you're seeing
for my sins. But in the last few years, obviously the big focus. So I'm responsible for all of the run dominant elements of the IT organisation, and one of those is the digital workplace as it was, and now the hybrid workplace as it is right now. Really looking to do what Marrita's talking about there, which is building that excellent colleague experience and looking how not only, from a HR perspective, but how we combine HR and technology to achieve that outcome for the organization. And you'll have seen some of those vehicles in that video, and we have to look at how we align technology behind that in order to enable some of those outcomes, and that's really our focus at the moment, and has been over the last 2 years, but we can talk a bit more about that as we get into the material.
Great. Okay, so maybe if you just for people, what does hybrid working mean in the PTSB context, Karen? What new ways of working have you introduced for colleagues?
Yeah, so I suppose with my introduction, I have to take everybody back to Q1 2020. I actually came into the role I'm doing now in people experience in February 2020, and the people experience team before me had worked very hard with a group of colleagues across PTSB to develop out a smart working framework with a whole load of different working practices. And we were in the process of rolling that out. And then in February, obviously, we had the announcement from the government, we had the pandemic, COVID, and literally overnight, we pivoted. And smart working really, the idea behind it was to commence that rollout as a key culture enabler to, I suppose, focus on the retention of colleagues right across the PTSB from the key moments that matter, support the different life stages, from job share, part-time, home working, compressed hours, some of the items you would have seen on the video. And we wanted to encourage more diversity of thought, making decisions in the best interests of customers, because we genuinely believe we should enhance that by, I suppose, having a diverse group of colleagues at all those moments that matter and attracting talent at all life stages. So that was a key thing for ourselves. So I suppose if we go back to Q1 2020, we really did pivot overnight. So at that point, with 5% of the workforce, for example, working from home, we'd little uptake on a number of the different practices we had. And overnight, we moved 52% working from home. So that for us, I suppose, over the course of the time, we identified that colleagues could be just as productive in those new environments than being in the, I suppose, on-site PTSB, one of the centres or the 77 branches. So what we were looking to do is, I suppose, how can we broaden this? So hybrid for us started, I suppose, through Smart Working Framework, moved into a response to the pandemic. And then in the April of 2020, we identified that we could really push for these new ways of working on an enduring basis. And between that and the following April 2021, we committed to giving all the colleagues across PTSB contractual entitlements in terms of home working, compressed hours, all the flexible practices. So for PTSB, hybrid is actually a flexible workplace where all these practices are enabled. And we committed now to these practices on a permanent basis. They're part of who we are and part of what we do. And at the moment, our job is to make sure that we enable them and that colleagues can bring their best selves to work, wherever that work may be.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Karen, because when you think of hybrid working, you really just think, 2 days at home, 3 days in the office. But what you've done in PTSB is so much more than that. And so many other, as you say, the smarter ways of working, flexible ways of working. So it's not just in or out of the office, which I think is really key, and obviously why you got the awards as well for that thinking. So Alan, for you, I think from the IT perspective, I'm sure it was a huge challenge 2 years ago, moving everybody off site. So what were the challenges technically around that?
Yeah, sure. So it's been a journey, all right. It's when you encounter something like this, there's no defined end goal in terms of what the strategy is going to be. It's something which evolves over time. So the first element was really looking at doing what Karen said, which is really looking at how we enabled that remote workforce, and that in essence was fairly straightforward. But then we now had a tier 1 service on our hands where we never had it in the past. And that had to be secured and available. And we had to invest a significant amount in making sure that it was robust and available for people to use on an ongoing basis. But I mean, from the outset, we've always had a hybrid workforce. We've had people in our branches. We haven't closed any branches throughout the entire pandemic. We've also had our call centers, and they've been open throughout the entire pandemic. And those groups of people have been all based in the office. But what we've had to do is look at how we can enable split teams to prevent cross-infection of teams and make sure that we had that continuity. So that was a big lift in terms of just readapting the organization just to cater for remote working and connecting people into that environment. Next element was really looking at, okay, how do we allow people to work together? How do we enable collaboration in this new context? We did have some elements of Zoom and WebEx, and we also had, voice conferencing. But what we did was we adopted Teams as a solution for enabling that cross-team collaboration. It has its challenges in terms of performance, and we've worked through all of those over the last 12, 18 months, making sure that it's as robust and available and performant as it can be. And over that, then what we've done is layer more and more capabilities on. So what we've also looked at is looking at how we enable people to use more effective communications techniques, using things like Wi-Fi more extensively, both from home and in the office. Reliance on broadband became increasingly important, and making sure that colleague experience was as good as it could be. So we've gone through this entire journey in terms of developing the capabilities over a period of time. And what we're also having a look at is or what we've also had to have a look at is, what is the strategy moving forward as we've moved towards the emergence from this. What is the right mix of technologies and capabilities and endpoints that people need in order to work effectively, and that's been an iterative process too. So we've ended up with a mix of capabilities, both fixed desks, VDI and laptops, and increasing use of laptops, which will enable the organization to work far more flexibly as they return to the workplace. And that's where our focus is right now today. If I was to look out and say, what will that be in a year or 2 years' time, I think it's still evolving. I don't think there's any one solution which is going to fix everything. I don't think there's anything out in the industry which will fix everything, or in terms of enabling that. But I think, and we'll talk about this later, the concept of having a team charter which talks about when you come back to the office, what you're going to be doing, how you're going to be interacting with colleagues, and why you need to be back in the office, I think is going to be absolutely key. And that will also help drive the mix of technologies and how we're going to connect all of these different teams together over time. So I think it's certainly an evolving strategy, and something that we've adapted, as we've moved through these last 2 years. But the journey's not over yet. I think we've got a long road ahead of us yet.
Absolutely, yeah. And you hear a lot where companies that's really leapfrogged their whole strategy by having to pivot and move offline, online. It's obviously the same with PTSB experience. Just on the technical side, is there anything that you would have done differently? I mean, I'm sure the whole rush to get everybody offline was difficult. Is there anything that you
I think we kind of experimented with certain things. I think what Karen mentioned earlier. We aren't afraid to have a look and see what works. So we looked at VDI as being more of a panacea for everything, but it was clear that it wouldn't be. So we've now pivoted over toward a greater use of laptops, and I think that is going to allow us to provide that more of a flexible working environment. I think VDI still has a place. We have a lot of remote workforce working from an IT perspective, especially in terms of consultants working on major programs within the organization, and they come in through that secure channel and use a VDI session within our network, and that's a great application for that. So I think that'll persist, and we'll probably grow that too. So the investment won't be wasted, and I think it will be that hybrid hybrid use of technology to underpin the hybrid ways of working. But I think that I think also I think perhaps 2020 hindsight and everything, if you'd known how this was going to pan out, you might have been more decisive about a strategy around this. But as things have happened, it's evolved, and I think it's still evolving, and will continue to evolve over time. But hopefully now, as we're emerging, despite the fact that we're in a high volume of infections at the moment, I think as we are emerging, we can be more decisive around that strategy over the next year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I see that working with PTSB. You're not afraid to try things, and it's all agile, type of mindset that we all need to have. And and I see that you do have that, and something's not working well. Yeah, okay, great. Let's just change that then. Which is really, really good. Okay, let's turn maybe to sort of people and culture. So there's a lot of talk about culture, particularly now, and loyalty to companies. And so, from your perspective, Karen, how would you say the PTSB culture supports hybrid or flexible working, and has it evolved or changed at all through the pandemic and post-pandemic period?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So in terms of culture, we set out, I suppose, what our Aspira's culture is, okay, and we very much look at there's things about working in Permanent TSB that are very special. So I'm responsible for reviewing the diagnostics, both internal and external, whether with Permanent TSB or the Irish Banking Culture Board. And we look and see, I suppose, how our culture is showing up. So firstly, as an organisation, okay, it's very clear to us that we have a people-centric culture, and that was a real question mark at the start of this, because that's the special piece, that's the part of Permanent TSB that we really want to preserve. And as part of our culture, what we've set out to do is, look at anything that we feel that are inhibitors on our culture. So, helping us, we want to speak more freely, and we want a diverse and inclusive organisation. We want people to be able to bring their best selves to work, and we want to create diversity of thought in the best interests of our customers. So we've set out the type of culture we want in terms of integrity, accountability, and innovation. And they're key markers for us in terms of how we do business. So smart working, actually, back in 2020, was one of 12 different enablers that we consider when we consider how we move our culture. And this, as I said to you at the start, was a key part of it. As we've evolved, we've had a look to see, I suppose, what's helping people in terms of preserving the DNA, that unique DNA element, and might be inhibiting it. And certainly through our Every Voice Counts survey, which is our annual diagnostic, and then we would do pulses to see how things are travelling over the course of the year. We haven't seen any drop in our culture, for example. So we have a culture index that's made up of 21 attributes. And from that, we can see that our target is to retain all of those, the composite of it, over 70% at a minimum, because we're striving for consistency, and then we're striving for improvement. So last year and this year, we've maintained 70% plus across the organisation. And that for us has been brilliant, because I suppose as we've moved through these evolutionary stages, we've seen the opportunity with that to try and make inroads there. And essentially what we're doing is we would look at the customer experience and consider the engagement levels with our colleagues. And we know from our diagnostics that these are very strongly correlated. So what's happening with our colleagues really matters. So at every stage, we take the feedback from colleagues, we consider the impact on these various initiatives, and we make sure that we're trying to deliver. Now, Marrita, some things are easier than others to deliver. So we might make a few inroads in quick wins. Other things will take an awful lot longer to deliver for colleagues, but I think it's having that open voice. So in terms of our culture, we're trying to be open, we're trying to speak freely, which is part of speaking up, and it's also part of ideation and improving things. And then letting colleagues know that maybe we'll get something done in 3 months, maybe it'll take 6 months, or maybe with the various geopolitical challenges and things that have happened over number of months, it might take longer because maybe the infrastructure isn't as available as it was 6 months ago. So, and these are all things we have to help people understand. But certainly in terms of our culture, we're trying to mirror that modern Irish society. And Permanent TSB is certainly, focused on creating a hybrid workplace where people can bring their best selves to work and manage, I suppose, that lifestyle balance as well for themselves in the interest of servicing the customer. So in terms of culture, we have challenges, I suppose, because we have to consider fairness is one of the things. So throughout the whole of our incident management and how we've transformed the organisation, we consider the principle of fairness, consistency and transparency. And I suppose sometimes fairness can be in the eye of the beholder. So Alan mentioned there that we have branches, and we also have to protect the resilience of our infrastructure in servicing our customers. And customers want to attend locations, they want to see colleagues, they want to see people. So a big part of our culture is actually how do we preserve that? So we again have to speak very freely to people around, look, there's certain types of roles where you are going to be able to avail of some practices, but not all practices. So for example, if you're in a branch, you can't work from, you have to be present where the customer is. Perhaps if you're in a contact centre, some of the technology might require you to be on site. And as technology evolves, work practices will evolve. So I think that's why this is agile, because the infrastructure maybe in the contact centres is going to change over time. The availability of infrastructure we have to do collaboration will change over time. But as we've gone through the stages, what we've identified is that there's types of activity that works better in an on-site workplace where you have the ability to collaborate more, where you have the energy, the excitement. I recently saw a picture of two people working and somebody is sitting with a laptop on their lap watching a football match on the screen, and then somebody else with their phone beside them, but they're physically at the football match. So there's a different energy and a different requirement depending on where you're working. And for me, my job is to work out where the best energy is so that we can actually get the best outcomes for Permanent TSB, for our communities and our customers. So that's really what we have to try and achieve. And we're learning. And I think Alan's big point is we're trying to put the power into the hands of colleagues to understand what is in the best interests of our customers, and then work together to develop your own team commitments charters so you can actually bring it to life. And that's where you look at your priorities, your team's priorities, and the bank's strategic priorities, and then decide how you work, where you work, what you work on, and are you committed to each other, and hold yourselves accountable every week to that. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it as it stands at the moment. And again, it's still evolving, Marrita. So and we learn.
I know that, we talked a lot about the charters and stuff, and I think it's a great way to keep people connected, and because there is that, sense of being disconnected when people are working at home, and how do you connect them to the organisation? How do you make them feel part of a team? So I think your charter, your culture charter, your team commitments charter is a great way to do that. Where did that idea come from, or is that something that you always did, or did that just evolve as part of the pandemic? Or
So I suppose, again, through ways of working, we had identified, I suppose, 52% of the workforce working from home. One of the questions in terms of people manager and preserving the DNA was how would we actually get people to work in a different manner, acknowledging that people had to do different things. So interestingly enough, that time, and I'm sure other companies experienced it as well, we have, I suppose, a multi kind of campus approach. So we have colleagues who had to work full-time on site, colleagues who had to work from home. And during the pandemic, there was an opportunity, I think, for people to speak that bit more freely in terms of their needs. And colleagues really stepped up. And if somebody had, parental caring responsibilities, or, elderly parents, or they had different commitments that they would ordinarily have outside work, but they might need to discuss inside work, but because of, I suppose, the threats to their family, the nature of their family, etc., they had to speak a little bit more freely to people managers. And as a result, I think people understood, I suppose, the dynamics of what was happening in their team that bit better, and they got closer. And that's certainly something that I've seen through the diagnostics. From that, we looked at how could we structure, I suppose, work in terms of supporting colleagues in their whole experience, okay, both at home and in work, but to be at their best in work and to be clear on what the deliverables were. So again, we have a lot of employee resource groups that cover different areas of interest, and working with them, we developed a team commitments charter. So to look at what the priorities of the team are, and then how this team is going to work together now that we have a smart working environment, and what are the requirements of the team over the next quarter, and is there certain commitments that we could hold each other to account on. So maybe it's the time we send emails, maybe it's somebody needs to arrive a little later because they have a pickup and a drop off, or maybe it's a case that they need an extended lunch break, or that they'd rather do an extra few hours in the evening, depending on the flexible practice that they're working under. And then, can the team bring it together and help as much? But I think the overarching thing is to remember, at the end of the day, we've a purpose here, and it's to service our customers, to work hard to service them, and remember that we are a community. So our job is to make sure that we deliver on the priorities of the bank. We have to deliver for our customers. So any team charter we have has to deliver for the overall organisation, then for the team, because the team has maybe a support function role, maybe a front-facing role, and whatever those roles look like. And then we look at the individual to see, can we make it happen? And they've evolved as well, because again, people mightn't have had experience having to have these conversations, and we're still experiencing this now as we start to bring people back. So over the next 6 months, we have a huge piece of work to do to help people managers in particular set their teams up for success as they move from perhaps working from home for the last 2 years into a hybrid arrangement. And so there'll be more reviews of the team commitments charter as colleagues start to realise what is better, be it in a home environment or an on-site workplace, to get those experiences right so you get the throughput correct. So it is all a learning. We're at a very learning stage, and there's a lot of trust put into everybody. Make sure, I suppose, we get it right. So developed, I would say, collaboratively with colleagues, a lot of listening, and we'll continue to iterate it, I'd say, over the first half of this year to see if we crack it.
Yeah, very good, Karen. And I presume, Alan, from your perspective, your IT teams have the same thing, same challenges as the best of the business teams. as to whether some need to be on site, like the engineers, and others are off site. So your guys, I presume, are doing the exact same in terms of charters, or would they have any special different requirements?
Yeah. So sorry, pardon me. Yeah, so I think, one of the elements we've got is we've developed this concept of neighborhoods within each of the buildings that we operate in. As Karen says, we operate on multiple, multi-centered. Half of my team is in Cork and half of them are in Dublin anyway, and now half of them are at home, or some of them may be halfway across the country as well. So that team charter is really going to underpin the makeup of that return to work, and what the technology overlay needs to look like in order to achieve that. But what I'm finding as well, it's less about the individual and more about teams. Now, the teams as in the actual work teams, because people want to turn up as a group. There's not much point in one person being in the office all by themselves. They want to be there as a group of people so they can collaborate. And one of the other elements is we also have agile teams. So we have agile development is a big theme within our development teams, and they have the need to collaborate well, but again, they can't all be in the same location. So it's looking at that mix of technologies which will allow us to be able to drive that that team ethos within the office and bring together diverse groups across multiple centres, whether they be working at home, in Cork, or in Dublin. And as I say, it's becoming more pervasive in terms of where teams work. So we are quite well used to working in that way, having been split between Dublin and Cork for some time, particularly from a technology perspective, and more broadly, because as I've said, we have partners who work both nearshore and offshore. So we are quite well versed in terms of bringing those teams together. But I think the team charter that we've talked about, I think will help underpin that, and it's something that we'll develop to enable that return to the workplace. It's really looking at how we fit into that group, into those neighborhoods, and how well the neighborhoods then work together too, because there's not much point with one neighborhood being completely empty and the other one being overflowing. So we need to have that dynamic use of the space that we have around us, and I think that's something that we'll find our way into over time.
Absolutely, yeah. Very good. In terms of talent, then, the whole war for talent, you hear all about this all the time. So the talent and recruitment. So has your recruitment policies or recruitment approach changed now that you have all this flexibility, flexible working team charters? There's a lot there to offer for prospective employees.
Yeah, so certainly, Marrita, in terms of the war for talent and the great resignation, I think I call it more a great reset, because I know over the 2 years of the pandemic, there was very little movement in the market. So yeah, the market would be quite hot at the moment. For us, we advertise, I suppose we look at all the roles that we have, and a lot of our roles, as we say, are hybrid, and we have a lot of flexible practices available. So that's part and parcel of, first of all, our advertising campaign. And then we have a look to see, what roles can be done where. So we're very open to that side of the house. Again, in terms of the agile piece, Alan mentioned earlier on in relation to Microsoft Teams, we're looking to use the Microsoft Teams infrastructure, and through our trials and tests over the last year, we also tested some of the kit in terms of how it can facilitate and enable interviewing. And through the pandemic, we did an awful lot of our recruitment remotely. So there's additional tools and infrastructure and kit in there that will help us into the future, and that's something we're looking to enable. But certainly in terms of talent attraction, like we are a hybrid workplace, and we're in the market to acquire talent on a hybrid basis, and we're looking for colleagues of experiences as well who want to help us adapt and grow and mirror that modern Irish society that we want to be. So in terms of talent attraction, we have a lot of interest, and colleagues, I'm finding that a lot of people who are looking for roles, that's the first thing they look at. They look to see, is that opportunity available to them? And again, it also helps with sustainability. So if we're looking at, the price of diesel, the price of petrol, what's happening out there at the moment, like these are, advantages in terms of your package. So if you look at your employee value proposition, you have these opportunities in terms of how you work, where you work, and then the cost of work. So yes, we're looking at it in the round. I would say you kind of need to have these practices going forward, because this is the expectations, the new expectations stands down.
It is though, isn't it? Like, it's really standard now that people expect hybrid working and flexibility. I've been, interviewing for the program, and I know people, it's one of the first questions they ask. It's looking for the program, there's certain roles that can be hybrid and it's fine. Now there's others, obviously engineers, building machines, they have to be there on site, and they've no expectations around that. And I know, Alan, on your team, you've recruited somebody senior recently who you probably wouldn't have recruited in a pre-pandemic world, because you've got flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think the fact that we've got hybrid and flexible working really allows us to look beyond, Dublin and Cork, which were the centres we would have employed around before. So you're right. I have two of my senior managers working remotely. One of them is working now out in Donegal, and the other one is in Clare. We've agreed a working practice where they'll be in the centres once a month for 2 or 3 days, just to interact with their teams, or to participate in workshops or whatever. And that seems to be working, and they're happy with that. So it's that kind of dynamic and that kind of flexibility that allows us to look, far beyond the centres of Dublin and Cork as well. And I think and I think that will grow over time. That we'll cast the net wider in terms of looking for talent. I mean, we are seeing attrition in particular areas. The market is very buoyant, but having that ability to cast the net wider in terms of the pool of resources, or the pool of potential candidates, I think is a real benefit in terms of trying to fill those roles more effectively. So I think it's certainly from a talent acquisition perspective, it's a very positive step forward.
Yeah. And, in order to retain staff, is there anything that you've had to do differently, or anything that you're aware of, specific actions to hold on to the people that you have?
Certainly from my perspective, I think, one of the big, Karen mentioned our Every Voice Counts staff survey that we do, and certainly from my team's perspective, one of the things that has decreased, I suppose, over the last 2 years is formal training. There's only so much you can do over Zoom calls or Teams calls or whatever. There's a lot to be said around formal training. So staff development is absolutely something that we're focused on this year. It's something that we're absolutely looking at in terms of looking at the vehicles that are available for us. Either they're self-paced learning or looking at formal class learning underpinned by certifications. But those are one of the key elements that we're looking at in terms of certification. But I think one of the other elements that we're looking at in terms of retention is just the nature of where Permanent TSB is going. We're a growing organization, where the Ulster Bank acquisition makes us a really exciting bank to be with at this point in time, and that coupled with the huge digital transformation program we have as well running, creates huge opportunity within the bank, and we have to capitalize on that in terms of both retaining people and attracting people back into the organization. It's a great place to hone and develop your skills, and that coupled with a commitment in terms of staff development and engagement, I think is at least 2 or 3 of the vehicles that we use in terms of retaining people.
Absolutely, yeah. Just in terms then of staff and staff expectations, do you find that they're much higher now, higher in terms of from the management team and from the company as a whole, the whole ESG agenda? Do you find that the Every Voice Counts, are there different themes coming through in terms of what people expect from an employer and from their management?
Yeah, I can answer this. So I suppose at a company level, we had a 65% completion rate actually on last EVC, or every voice count survey. And from that, we had some very high scores in certain areas, which is where colleagues want to see action, which is around, first of all, I suppose that people-centric culture that colleagues have told us they love. So that's something we really need to preserve and consider that in terms of a hybrid workplace. In terms of, interesting enough, flexible work practices was the highest requirement of colleagues right across the bank. We had 1,400 pieces of feedback on it. So it's quite significant. An organisation, 2,500. So that's a key thing. The other thing for ourselves is around training and development, and Alan pointed to it. So we have a kind of an approach to on-the-job learning and formalised, training. And for a lot of our colleagues, you need to be competent, you need to be capable, and you need to have those qualifications in order to do particular activities across Permanent TSB. So we focused learning on those and certification, and we do provide right up to level 9 education for colleagues depending on the role they're in, the remit. So there's career paths, and that's another area that came up that colleagues want to see what those career paths are. Those career paths have changed over the last 2 years because with hybrid, there's more cross-functional activity, multidisciplinary activity. And the other thing though that actually comes through really strongly is the fact that colleagues love the project opportunities. And we've quite a flat structure in Permanent TSB. We don't have loads of levels. So you get access to an awful lot of senior people on a day-to-day basis. And this gives you an opportunity, as Alan said, to hone the skills, to take advantage, get involved in programs, projects, learn new skills, and jump out of the comfort zone, I'd say. And what's come back to me is colleagues actually love that opportunity and want to be considered. So that's something we're looking at again in terms of how we look at our talent, and can we make sure that we're giving people those opportunities and the space to grow and develop their skills and better Permanent TSB. So, but interestingly, Marrita, flexible practices has been the highest thing that's come out in 2 years in a row on the survey, and loads of commentary in relation to colleagues, in relation to life changing, how it's been able to create the space to study. And certainly from the video you would have seen in terms of the compressed hours, that really gives people the opportunity to strive for something. And the example there was a diploma in law. So, there's opportunities right across for people. So for me, it's looking at what are those extras and other things that colleagues want, and how do we preserve them in this new environment. So I think that's it in a nutshell. And expectations have increased in terms of the tech and the tools. So there's a huge expectation around things working right first time. And I suppose we have to help people understand that we're trialing things, and we need their experience in order to let us know if it's a right fit for Permanent TSB. So some of those technologies we've adopted quickly, others, aspects of them work, and then other aspects are not really suitable for ourselves, and things that we need to consider and develop, and just consider maybe they're in a pointed area of PTSB as opposed to broadly.
So
perhaps I can.
The technology.
Yeah, I can come in there a little bit as well. So I think absolutely. People's expectations across the board is that technology is going to work. It's going to work first time. It's like the plumbing or the electricity. You turn it on and it's going to work. We were only talking during the week as to how we're going to manage, all of these AV systems in our meeting rooms when someone goes in and steals a remote control or deconstructs everything, and the next person comes in and it's not working, and then they spend the first half an hour of the meeting trying to get the tech to work. That isn't acceptable, and those are the things that we need to crack in terms of making sure that those are all working. The other thing I think is we have to think about the multi-generational cross-section of people that we have working within the organization. One of the things we've introduced, and Karen would know about this as well, is the Work Vivo platform, comms platform. It's more of a social interaction platform and a comms platform, which will be launched very, very soon. And that's a real attempt to begin to connect people into the communications platform for the organization, allowing that two-way dialogue between colleagues and the center in terms of making that more dynamic. So it's not only about pushing information out, it's really about getting feedback, allowing people to interact with people, setting up their own discussion threads, and finding out what's important to people as well. So I think there's a variety of different technologies that we can bring to and make that work. But I think fundamentally, it's around making sure that people have the technology, and it's available when they want to use it. It's all about being as effective at home, in the office as you are when you're at home. I myself, I power up the laptop around 7:30, log on and check email and follow up on things. But when I'm in the office and I have to commute, I get in for about 8 or whatever. And then if I can't get onto Wi-Fi, or if something isn't working, it makes you feel like packing up, going back home again. So that reliability is absolutely paramount, and that's what we have to focus on, and that's really where we've been investing. So as I mentioned, we've done a lot of work in terms of making sure that the reliability of the remote access services is strong. We've enhanced Wi-Fi both at home and in the office. We've also looked at some of our security controls in terms of how we enhance those to make that experience effective for people in the office as well. And all of those are contributing to make a very good experience for people when they return back to the office. And I think one of the elements which you have within the program is the concierge service that we've implemented, because some of the people that are coming back into the office, it's the first time they've ever been into a permanent TSB office. So we need to make sure that that experience for those people is good, whether it's getting a badge or signing on for the first time or interacting with people or using a meeting room or even just finding their way around the building. It's making sure that they have those resources available to them so that they can make that experience, so that experience is as seamless as possible, and that they feel welcome when they come back into the office. So that colleague experience is at the heart of what we're trying to do, whether it's technology or any of the other levers that we have available to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really central to the program. It's a really strong message right from the top, and a great direction for the program to take. Is that everything we're doing, we look to see, well, is this a great colleague experience? What do we need to make it great? And it's a really it's really refreshing in the program to have that direction, that support from the management team around doing it right.
Absolutely.
So, Marrita, hi. Sorry to intrude. It's a really kind of interesting conversation, but there's a few questions coming in both via email and perhaps conscious of your time, which is so valuable. So maybe if I could ask a few questions, maybe just to get your thoughts or perhaps responses on a few questions that have come in. So Cassandra, a colleague of ours, was asking, she just had an observation in terms of facilitation and how, what your feeling was the importance of facilitation as a skill set in terms of meetings, particularly in terms of the remote colleagues and those that are in the office, and that kind of skill set that has been learned over the last 24 months that hitherto wouldn't have been there. What have your learnings been in that area? I mean, I would take it as a given that it's very important, but what have your own unique learnings have been in that area?
In terms of facilitating meetings remotely or kind of hybrid?
Hybrid.
Yeah, well, hybrid would have that more attention. So I suppose if you're all in person, you have the chair, you have the secretary, you have all the I suppose proponents around the table and can read the cues. And again, if you're all on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that, again, everyone has a level playing field. When you move to hybrid, it needs to be a lot more considered. So the chair is probably chairing the meeting, but one of the things we've been looking at is a moderator to ensure, again, this is around the diversity of thought and ensuring everybody has been considered in the room. So it's an area we're looking at, because one thing around the team charter is in-person meetings. What meetings should be held in person and what meetings should be held, I suppose, hybrid or remote. So certainly we've even looked at some of our committee meetings, and the view is that perhaps the committee would sit, but the attendees or the presenters can go on virtual, because then it's kind of an even playing field, because the contributors in the room who are making the decision are able to argue the toss on it, and the presenter is able to, set out the stall. We did a survey actually on what colleagues would like in terms of meeting scenarios, and in terms of formal meetings, presenters would prefer to remain on virtual, and attendees would like to be in person for those particular committee meetings. So it's interesting. However, we have had the likes of sales meetings, for example, and more, I suppose, customer engagement meetings where we look at what suits the environment, what suits the objective, and how to set it up. There is a piece around the roles that people play in a meeting, and it needs to be much more considered. So setting out the rules, because if you've some people in the office and some people at home, you know, the sidebar chats, the water cooler moments that occur naturally in a room, you can't hear them. And it's quite disrespectful to people who might be on, virtual technology. So rules around that are something that we're looking at to help, I suppose, behaviours evolve in this area.
Yeah, no, that's I think it's a universal issue that people are struggling with, because hybrid meetings are okay for certain issues, but certainly if there's strategic decisions or kind of big calls being made, most people would prefer to be in the room. Again, from a presentation point of view, it makes sense that you can use the technology more intelligently and efficiently, and while it's at the same time, Karen, reducing your carbon footprint, which is obviously part of what we all want to do at the moment. Alan, maybe one for you perhaps, and we touched on it earlier, but the whole kind of leapfrog into the remote and hybrid work environment has, I suppose, created multiple outposts and challenges in terms of cybersecurity. And John Anthony Fitzsimons was kind of, I suppose, even adding an additional layer in terms of the Ukrainian and the Russian hacking and so forth and so on. But being a bank, you know, you're going to be acutely sensitive to your cyber pain points at any given time anyways. Again, we'll take that as read, but have there been any additional challenges from a cyber point of view in terms of security points for remote working and so on? And, you know, how have you addressed them? Because I imagine you must have employees that you never actually physically met that are fully remote, although they're full-time employees. So, you know, the whole induction process for them must present some challenges.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally the core infrastructure, you know, is secure. We use strong authentication, two-factor authentication for anybody coming into our network, be they employees or third parties. It's just the control points which change around those kinds of elements. But we've looked at that. We've done penetration tests. We've done hardening of that. We've upgraded that environment to make sure it's appropriate. One of the things I mentioned, I didn't mention, as COVID hit, we were in the middle of doing a migration from Windows 7 to Windows 10. So we've also used that as an opportunity to improve the security of the endpoint. We've done penetration tests on the endpoint to make sure that they're appropriate. And what we also do is make sure that the systems that people are accessing are appropriate too. So we do reviews every month or every quarter to make sure that people's access to systems remains appropriate. We also have a fairly effective levers process, which is make sure that people's access is removed in a timely manner. So if I left the bank tomorrow, my access to log on remotely would be deactivated overnight. So there's these controls which come together in terms of managing that. But in terms of the wider crisis around the Ukraine and Russia, obviously that is driving a greater emphasis there. And we have a team who's working with experts across the industry looking at the threat and the emerging threat and how we can adapt and block probes against our network from various different locations. We've also looked at our cyber defenses as well. So we've looked at DDoS and some of our other defenses as well to make sure that they're all in place and operational. And what we also do is we run cyber scenario initiatives where we look at a particular scenario, be it either ransomware or a DDoS attack or something like that, and see what impact it would have against on our network, but more importantly, how we would respond and how we would recover the organization in that regard as well. So it's cyber is embedded, really, if you like, in the DNA of the solutions that we're implementing and in the approach that we're taking. Obviously, because as you say, we are a bank, and it has to be, and we have to protect our customers as well. So it's very, very much embedded in the DNA of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, that's a very comprehensive answer. As you would expect from a bank, in fairness, cyber must be, I suppose, front of house, given that most of us have morphed over to actually doing online banking as a very regular kind of outcome. So it's assuring to hear that. And Karen, perhaps another one for you, the perennial question: Has anyone refused to come back, have gone totally native, and have shuffled the uniform of the TSB and are working completely remotely and just don't want to come back to the mothership?
Well, I suppose we have last year, when it's interesting because, again, I suppose expectation shift. So when we moved to, we pivoted with COVID, and then had set expectations that we were going to give colleagues up to 3 days at home and 2 days on site. We had decided that that was basically to preserve the culture of PTSB. However, we then reviewed the diagnostics as we moved through the year and noted that it hadn't impacted on our culture, so we were still preserving those relationships. However, if we were to extend it, maybe we'd worry about it more. What we've decided at this point is, and we're looking at it in stages, so what we want to do is create an experience that colleagues want to be on site for. So our view is that at this juncture, we're not going to bring all colleagues back into their 3-2 arrangement. What we're going to do is work with each team to see what works best for the dynamic of that team and the delivery of the objectives. So if an activity needs to be performed on site and that team needs to be on site, then that person would have to be on site to deliver that activity. If it's a role that doesn't need to be on site, then they won't need to be on site at this juncture. However, what we'll do is we'll set them up for hybrid. But we do believe into the future that there's different rhythms. So some colleagues, I could give you an example of in the finance function, you have annual reports, you have year end, you have half year. So there's kind of a swell of activity where colleagues may need to be on site more. So rather than every month, it might be a particular period. And then for other functions, it might be that's an activity required every month. So what we've worked out is one size certainly does not fit all. And what we're trying to do is get ourselves into a position where we understand the rhythm between now and July. And that will inform, I suppose, policy as we move forward. So we haven't mandated a return. So therefore, I suppose we're not hearing the noise, and colleagues need to come in on site to be enabled for hybrid working, make sure all the tech is working, they understand how to use, the booking systems, Wi-Fi. So colleagues are booked into that, and we're not having refusals on that. But I think it's more around how we look at the medium term as to how we're going to set it up. But I am hearing there's an awful lot of noise out there. But I think for us, it's more, let's see how these few months go, start to understand what activity is necessary in the on-site workplace. And again, it's informed by the priorities of PTSB and the priorities of the team. And can we fit the colleague around those priorities in the role or not?
Okay. I mean, that's really interesting, because when you talk about the noise around, and maybe it's one from Marrita and yourself as well, but you look at the state of remote work, and last year when that report was generated, and I think the number one issue that came back, which is perennial, it's like that old chestnut, have you any great weaknesses? I work too hard. I'm not able to stop working. But one of the big ones, I think, was from the remote point of view, was not being, able to unplug. And consequently burnout and sense of isolation and so on, which is universal. But I suppose particularly maybe in the consulting industry, but also I'm guessing in your own industry as well, because it is almost 24/7 now, and there's threats and challenges, and there's engagement the whole time. It's not a 9-to-5 environment anymore. People are accessing the bank, and that process started with the hole in the wall many years ago, which people are very used to, but they're transacting 24/7 now on the web, and I'm guessing your platforms are live the whole time. But that ability to not be able to unplug, and the consequences of that, how do you manage that, I suppose, in terms of, and you touched on it earlier in some of the points, in terms of the cadence of the way you kind of put those work processes together and stack them up. But it is, I suppose, when you talk about the great resignation that's going on at the moment, and you look at a particular generation, that kind of, I suppose, pulse comes back of potential burnout as an issue. And it is, it certainly is. I would probably say, in the context of my own experience and observation, loneliness is probably as big a challenge. People get lonely. You mentioned the water cooler and that whole kind of just having a coffee. That, is part of the pleasure of work as well. Is actually physically meeting people and engaging with them. And that point of being alone and loneliness and burnout, how do you deal with that?
So I suppose just to reflect on a few points there. So in terms of the on colleagues, some colleagues would like to be in the office. So for example, I suppose again back to the video, okay, if you're in an apartment with a number of people. So right through the pandemic, okay, we have looked for and looked after, I suppose, those personal choices. So if we've colleagues who are struggling, you know, in a remote environment, we try and obviously address those and risk assess them over the course of the last few years to make sure we can facilitate what we need to facilitate there. But certainly I think this comes down to, you know, some colleagues will want more in time than out time, and other colleagues will want more out time. So we've enabled those personal choices first. So we know kind of how many colleagues would like to be in the office full time. We know how many want to be in like part-time, 3 days a week. So we have a good sense of what the distribution is. And we have colleagues who'd like to be in full-time because of their personal circumstances at home. And we have colleagues the other way. What we're trying to do, I suppose, is look at flexibility, look at the accountabilities and help people stay connected. Now, in terms of burnout, there was a huge amount, I suppose, of challenge with colleagues who've never worked from home, and colleagues had thought they could never do this either. They were happy coming into the office, meeting their friends. So people that I never expected to enjoy it have actually completely changed their outlook on work from home. Other people can't wait to get back in. And what I'm hearing now, and this is why I think this is good, as colleagues come back in, they're enjoying the interactions and they're enjoying meeting people. And from what I'm hearing so far, colleagues seem to want a bit of both. But I am very conscious of the not clicking off. And last year, again, through working with Alan and Marrita and the teams that we've worked through, we looked at the Every Voice Counts feedback. And a lot of it was, you know, helping people to disconnect. So I know Microsoft Teams enables a call solution, and we might look at that in the future. But what we did very quickly last year is we gave all of our more junior colleagues who don't have maybe an iPhone, we gave everybody an app-enabled phone. Who's working from home, so that they didn't have to log back onto their computer to look at stuff, but they could, you know, and they wouldn't get bombarded by customers or other colleagues and support functions, and that when their time to switch off was there, they could switch off. But they could look at, maybe as Alan mentioned, when the WorkVivo platform comes in, they'll be able to look at that at a time that suits them with a coffee, or they can actually go in and check on their payslip at a time that suits them, without feeling when they log in they see 10 emails and they must answer the 10 emails, you know, when they really only wanted to go in and have a look at their payslip. So we've done that as kind of a quick fix to help. And we've also done a piece of work with our management population to help them understand how to manage colleagues through this. But the team commitments charter is going to be a big thing around it, because that's going to help hold each other accountable in terms of how we manage the activity during the day. But it definitely is a challenge, because depending on your mindset, like we as an organisation might say one thing, absolutely the customer is on 24/7, and we have to help people realise that somebody else performs the activity at this time and you perform it, you know, between A to B time. So these are things that are evolving. Work practices are definitely changing, and it's an area that we need to really work hard on, because well-being is a big requirement for colleagues, and they've done it in terms of COVID and felt they could do it. But again, another point Alan made is around the walk-in in the morning. So, you know, times of meetings have been set up over the last 2 years that everybody would have been happy to drop on at. They're not going to be happy to drop on at now. And these are new considerations. And that's why the Team Commitments Charter needs to constantly evolve, because as your team dynamics change, as people's needs change, you have to respect those changes, because that's the only way you're going to get the best out of people. But it's evolving, and it's something that we're going to have to keep a watchful eye on. It's something certainly that I would be very aware of. And we provide loads of supports, from EAP to, you know, manage your time effectively. We've online courses, we facilitated courses, but it's more around helping people, give them the tools and infrastructure themselves and personal accountability to understand the organisation doesn't expect this, we expect whatever, and then work towards that and help people move. So that would be.
I think that the charter is really powerful. It's almost like a business continuity plan. It needs to be updated regularly with the circumstances that prevail and are coming at you, because who would have thought 24 months ago, you know, we do a lot of business continuity planning. Nowhere, anywhere had we written pandemic as a material issue. Planes dropping from the sky, trains, you know, crashes, snow, storms, whatever. But, you know, so we don't know what's ahead of us. I'm conscious of, you know, time, as you say, in terms of where we're at and in terms of not being able to unplug, and we're running a little bit over as well. So I just want to say at this point, on behalf of the Institute, thank you, Karen and Alan and Marrita, for hosting it. It's been a real pleasure listening to you, and it's gone so quickly. And hopefully if we could send on any of the questions that come in afterwards that you might be able to respond to. Our next session, you know, being parochial about the whole thing, is on ESG, that hot topic at the moment, and that's on the 5th of May. And we'll be sending out details on that in due course. But Gurmil Mahagat Galer, it's been a real interesting morning. Thank you to our President, Marrita, for hosting it. And equally thank you again to Karen and Alan for coming on board. And for those of you that stayed with us, really appreciate your time. So without any further ado, I'm conscious that the bell has rung and we'd like to get you off in good time. Now, we did start a little bit late, so we're still within the actual confines. So have a great day and stay safe, and thank you for attending. God bless everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Bye.